Mobile Suit Gundam. If you've ever so much as glanced at an anime wall scroll in your life, you're almost certainly familiar with that title, and if you have any appreciation whatsoever for the history of the anime movement, you likely know how monumentally influential Yoshiyuki Tomino's original series was on the industry landscape. It is an important anime, maybe the most important anime, depending on your criteria, but if you're anything like me, even with that knowledge, you may be hesitant to get into the series. As a result of its incredible success, the Gundam franchise has become a terrifying hydra of alternate realities, tournament-driven shonen toy commercials, and spin-off comedies, all twisted up around the monstrosity that is the Universal Century timeline. With complicated and intricately detailed lore that spans every kind of media you can think of, and a few that you probably wouldn't, the Universal Century is one of the most intimidating monoliths of canon in geek media. And while it is all very digestible and rewarding for those willing to put in the time to experience it, it can be hard knowing where to start. It doesn't help that, unlike many other classic anime, that original season of Gundam that started it all has not aged gracefully. Its story is still phenomenal, but aesthetically speaking, you could tell the production was stretched to its limits even when it aired, and the cold light of Blu-ray remastering has done it few favors. Mobile Suit Gundam is undeniably worth watching, but it's also an understandably hard sell for those who aren't already invested in the franchise. And the catch-22 there is that the original series is kinda required reading if you want to fully appreciate continuations like Zeta Gundam and Char's Counterattack. There aren't many obvious jumping-on points for the Universal Century, and while I've recommended Gundam Unicorn before to fill that role as a distant sequel, it doesn't do much to push viewers to the early stuff. If only there were some sort of modern prequel, one as polished as the Unicorn OVAs, that could introduce new fans to the series' concepts and prime them to engage with the classic tragedy of the One-Year War. There's no point in drawing this out. You already know that this video is about that very thing. Mobile Suit Gundam: The Origin, a 2015 OVA based on a manga of the same name by OG Gundam character designer Yoshikazu Yasuhiko, who also served as a director on the OVA, which expands an extended flashback from that manga into a full origin story for series villain Char Aznable. That OVA has now been repackaged as a 13-episode TV series subtitled Advent of the Red Comet, which is one of the best things currently simulcasting on this video's sponsor, Crunchyroll. And I'm here to tell you why you should watch it, whether you're already curious about Gundam or not. To give you a bit of extra context, for most of my life I haven't really been a Gundam guy. I was too young to enjoy Wing when it aired on YTV in the late 90s, and Gundam Seed just wasn't for me. So the first Gundam series I ever gave a proper shot, entirely of my own volition, was the Mari Okada-penned Iron-Blooded Orphans, and the first Universal Century story that I ever dug into was the OVA version of Origin. So when I say that this series makes a fantastic entry point into the broader Gundam canon, I am speaking from personal experience. This is what convinced me to watch the original series, and while I'm still a pretty casual Gundam fan, especially by Gundam fan standards, some of those guys are pretty scary. I mean, they're all very lovely people. Where was I? Right. I am very much enjoying my gradual descent down the Gundam rabbit hole, and this is what pushed me into it in the first place. So what is it about this series that's so compelling? Well, Gundam: The Origin is certainly an easy-to-appreciate series on an aesthetic level. As a Sunrise anime comprising 6 feature-length episodes that were released over the span of 3 years, it should come as no surprise that it is absolutely gorgeous. The camera work is complex and impressive, the 2D and 3D elements are composited together almost seamlessly, the action scenes are all top tier, and there's so much subtle personality infused into even the least important character animations. The big CGI robots are just about the only animated elements of this show that aren't the best in their class, and even those are impressive when you line them up next to pretty much any mecha anime this side of Unicorn. Even by OVA standards, Gundam: The Origin is a standout production, so it kind of goes without saying that it's one of the best looking anime on TV right now. If you're a Sakuga addict, especially one who appreciates great character animation, this series is going to be like crack to you. And even if you're wondering why I just brought up Boruto's dad's boyfriend's girlfriend in this discussion of mecha anime, there's a good chance that the sheer volume of quality animation on display here will blow you away. especially if you crank your speakers up and let Takayuki Hattori's bombastic orchestral score wash over you. The OVAs were mastered for 5.1 surround sound in both English and Japanese, so they're just as much of a treat for the ears as they are for the eyes. And having watched both versions, I can attest that the series is every bit as great dubbed as it is subbed. Only the sub version of the TV broadcast is currently available on Crunchyroll, but if you live in the US and you'd prefer to watch the dub, that is about to air on Toonami starting July 6th. Now, with all the time I've spent on preamble and lavishing praise on its production values, you might be wondering if this anime's story is any good. And that's a fair concern to have. One pitfall that prequel stories often fall prey to is not actually being stories at all so much as they are narratively justified fanservice dumps. And Origin does show symptoms of that problem at certain moments. There are a lot of times when Char's life coincidentally intersects with major and minor characters from the original anime, and when I first watched this without having seen that anime, I didn't even need Yazzie to point those cameos out for me. The camera lingers on them, no matter how unimportant their role in the current story actually is, in a manner that makes them almost impossible to ignore. And that can be distracting, but I was able to put that minor annoyance aside because, on the whole, Origin does manage to tell a compelling, purposeful story that I could appreciate with next to zero knowledge of the extensive canon that follows it. Admittedly, I do have a bit of a soft spot for Machiavellian revenge stories, and through filling in the backstory of the fiendish Red Comet, the Origin does a great job of scratching that particular itch for me. In fact, the first episode kicks off by throwing us into the middle of a political scheme in motion, as Zeon Zum Daikun, an influential philosopher and politician leading the charge for Earth's space colonies to gain independence, is assassinated by his traitorous chief of staff, Degwin Zabi. Through ruthless political maneuvering, going so far as to murder his own son to turn public opinion against his rivals, Degwin is able to usurp Daikun's fledgling republic and transform it into the dictatorial Principality of Zeon. But as is often the case in these hasty fascist coups, the Zabis do leave some loose ends, namely Daikun's children, Artesia and Casval, who will grow up to become Gundam's Sayla Mas and Char Aznable, respectively. Though before they get there, they'll have to survive multiple attempts on their lives by the Zeon regime. And while the sweet Artesia struggles to maintain her hope and optimism in the face of all this despair and treachery, even at the tender age of 9, Casval's sharp mind is already calculating plans for vengeance. Those plans take years to come to fruition as the siblings are carted from one safe house to another, endangered by various adults who want to use them for their own political ends. Some take better care of the kids than others. Teobalo Mas, their adopted father, is a kindly man who only wants the best for the renamed Sayla and Edward, but no amount of kindness can divert Edward from his cause. Eventually, he abandons his family and enrolls in a colonial military academy under the name Char Aznable. His capabilities as a soldier earn him the respect of the Zeon military brass and give him a chance to get closer to his classmate and the Zabi heir, Garma, setting the stage for his revenge. And of course, a lot of innocent and good-natured people die along the way, because Casval is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a good person. He's a violent sociopath who has no qualms about killing anyone who gets in his way, and who will use and discard those who trust him without batting an eye. Hell, he claims his false identity by sending the real Char Aznable, his spitting image, to be killed in his place, alongside hundreds of innocent passengers in a spacecraft explosion that he probably could have prevented. And that's just one of the atrocities he plays a role in by the time the series wraps. While he's not a character you can easily like or root for, Char's manipulation and scheming is fascinating to watch in a Gankutsuo kind of way, or a Death Note kind of way for the rest of you. And even when you know what he's done and what he's planning to do, he has an appealing charisma about him that at least makes it easy to understand how so many people fall under his spell. Char definitely gets the lion's share of the screen time in this series, but he's far from the only great character in the cast. In the early episodes, Sayla is an absolute delight, and the character animators have way too much fun with her, as is the too-nice-for-his-own-good Ramba Ral. Crowley Haman is an absolute badass, and I just want to give Dozel Zabi a big hug. As the series does span quite a long period of time, we don't get to spend a lot of it with any one supporting character, but pretty much all of them shine with the time they're given. Which is important, because without creating those human connections, Gundam wouldn't be able to effectively convey the human cost of mech warfare, and warfare in general. Now, you might have noticed that I haven't said much about mecha in discussing this mecha anime, and that's because they don't really factor into it much. Origin is largely focused on the political machinations of the pre-Mobile Suit era of interstellar warfare. The early development phase of Zeon's iconic Zaku robots plays out in tandem with Char's rise through the ranks at the military academy, and while those mecha do see combat in the last arc of the series, and that combat is pretty fun to watch, the Gundam, for which the whole franchise is named, is only ever referenced toward the very end. You might think that this would make the Origin a poor choice for those looking to see if the OG real robot anime is their thing, but it is precisely because of this reduced focus on the mecha aspects of the franchise that I think this is so good for newcomers. Because beyond the giant robots, the beating heart of the Gundam series has always been its powerful anti-war message. The cool robot fights of the original series don't exactly hold up today, at least not so far as action and animation go, but its characters and its sharp, politically charged writing do. Your capacity to get invested in tragic, morally ambiguous war stories is going to be the deciding factor in whether or not you can enjoy Mobile Suit Gundam in its original form, and the tightly polished robot-light Origin is kind of a perfect litmus test to figure out if that's your thing. If it's not, then you might be better off checking out some later, more standalone entries in the UC timeline, like Unicorn and Thunderbolt, and then doubling back later when your thirst for the lore becomes unquenchable. Or it may be that the Universal Century is just not for you. The UC timeline accounts for the bulk of Gundam-related media, but it's far from the be-all and end-all of what the franchise has to offer. Plenty of Gundam fans enjoy more lighthearted, action-driven fare like G Gundam and Build Fighters, while others just prefer the different flavors of serious war story offered up by the likes of IBO. And when you've got literally hundreds of hours of content to plow through in a decades-old franchise, knowing what you don't like can be even more valuable than knowing what you do. Of course, I am a self-admitted filthy casual when it comes to this series, so if you'd prefer to hear the words of a more veteran Gundam aficionado...
Char Aznable did nothing wrong.
Not the time, honey. Could you say the other thing?
No. You say it, and make it convincing.
Okay. If you've looked at the original Mobile Suit Gundam and it just doesn't appeal to you, you should definitely give the Origin a shot. And if you don't like it, watch Iron-Blooded Orphans. It's got some awesome fights, you'll cry a lot.
McGillis did nothing wrong.
Now, as for which version of Gundam the Origin you should watch, honestly, both are great. While the TV cut of Unicorn suffered from not having quite enough footage to fill its runtime, Origin breaks up very cleanly into satisfying 25-minute chunks. And those chunks are, in my opinion, a little more easily digestible than the hour-long OVA chapters. Being on Crunchyroll, they're also a lot more accessible. Also, while the first two OPs for the TV cut were a little on the lame side, the latest one, set to Beyond the Time from Char's Counterattack, is one of the best damn OPs this year. The way they use that classic footage is so freaking cool. So I guess I'm leaning toward the TV series, and if you want to see that OP, or the rest of the anime, I guess, click the link in the doobly-doo to check that out on Crunchyroll. And if you don't have a Crunchyroll account yet, let me tell you why you should change that by signing up for a 14-day free trial at crunchyroll.com/basement. Crunchyroll is the industry leader for anime streaming in North America, with a massive catalog of shows, old and new, that grows literally every day as they simulcast new episodes of the latest seasonal anime right when they air in Japan. If you want to keep your finger on the pulse of the anime industry, Crunchyroll is the place to do it. And they make it easy to do with smartly designed watch queue and search features that make finding new shows to watch a snap. Anime is not all they offer either. They also simulpublish a selection of fantastic manga, including Arslan Senki, Attack on Titan, Space Brothers, Drifting Dragons, and Planet With, all of which come included with your Crunchyroll subscription for just $7.99 a month. But you don't have to pay a dime to see for yourself how much value Crunchyroll really offers, because all you gotta do is head to crunchyroll.com/basement to start your free trial and start binging Gundam the Origin and hundreds of other great anime right now. If you're a Gundam fan, let me know in the comments below which Gundam installment you think is the best, and if you're not, tell me what other mecha anime have sucked you in over the years. While you're down there, there's some buttons, they do YouTube stuff, and I'd really appreciate it if you click some combination of them. If you're having trouble deciding, the subscribe button's a classic. I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.